Hello again, and we are back with another session. Blessing and I talking a lot of talking actually, and it's so good to be back. And today we're going to be talking about influencing with emotional intelligence. So, Dr. Blessing Nakimio, welcome back, and I
Thank
would
you.
let yeah. So over to you. Hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Do comment and let us know where you are joining us from. We want to know. And thank you very much for all those who have been on this journey with us. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you being with us in this space. Do let us know where you're joining from because we want to know what our reach is like. And please feel free to share this with your friends, with your networks. Let's just get this platform broadcasted to the world. Like Maureen said, we're talking about influencing with emotional intelligence. Let's start from the beginning. What is influence? Influence, from the dictionary, says is the capacity to have an effect on the character or behavior of someone. So essentially, it's being able to change, impact, effect what something or another is doing. Now, we all know that as leaders, we probably have influence over those that we are leading. How about doing it with emotional intelligence? That's what this conversation is all about. So, Maureen, tell us, what is emotional intelligence?
Yes, emotional intelligence is our ability to manage our emotions, but also help others manage theirs as well. And I come at it from the perspective of the brain, in the sense that the emotional part of our brain is what drives our behavior, our actions. So being able to manage that emotional center of the brain is what emotional intelligence is. So it's being intelligent about our emotions. And the emotions come from the thoughts that we have, from things that thoughts that we think about, and even behaviors that we indulge in. So it's being able to manage those. Like, as we're discussing influencing with emotional intelligence, and through the week, we've been talking a lot about goal setting. Influencing is key in being able to influence others, but also influencing ourselves, influencing the actions that we take. As leaders, we know this saying, you cannot lead others if you can't lead yourself. So it always starts with that self-leadership. So today I really want us to, for everyone listening, to think about the influence you have on yourself, but also the influence you have on other people. And that could be people you lead, but it could also be the influence you have on people you're interacting with as a business person, or even as your colleagues as well. So looking at it from the perspective of emotional intelligence, now emotions, they say, are contagious. Emotions, so that depending on how you are, would actually impact on others. But emotions also impact highly on the decisions you take. So for example, if you're having the emotion of stress, it's going to, what that does is that it literally hijacks your brain. Most times, especially if it's a negative emotion, it will, or the stress is a negative stress, what it will do is hijack your brain and prevent you from taking the actions that you need to take to achieve the goal that you want to achieve. So it's really being intelligent and paying attention to those emotions, because that will impact on how you relate to people, how people relate to you, but also on the actions that you take.
Okay. Thanks for that, Maureen. And I think probably was last year or year before, there was a whole, maybe a bit before that, there was a whole phase of EQ, emotional intelligence. Everyone was talking about emotional intelligence. And I think to an extent, it was almost misleading in some way. So let's come down to the crux of EQ, or emotional intelligence. What does it look like? What really does it mean to be emotionally intelligent?
Emotional intelligence literally starts with being aware of your emotions and being
mm,
able to manage them. And I'm saying manage because emotions are information. So they let us know how we're feeling, but they can also come from things we experience. And I'll go back to the session we did yesterday on osukosu. And I'll keep coming back to this osukosu because I love it so much. But it's a typical example, like you gave, excuse me,
mm,
blessing, was that you saw something and it created an emotion in you,
mm,
and that emotion, if you were not paying attention to it, could have gone on to create another emotion. The interesting thing is that after we did that video, I actually experienced osukosu, which was
mm,
interesting. And what happened was that there was somebody I had been, talking to for a while, trying to interact with her, in terms of things that, because we're in similar areas. And
mm.
I noticed that what she had now done, she had posted something that she was doing with somebody else.
Okay.
And I kind of that created an emotion in me of, but I've been speaking to you all this while, and we are
Mm,
not doing that. But now you've reached out to somebody else and you're doing what we were talking about. And
mm.
that created different
Triggered.
emotions of
Mm,
rejection, emotions of um, um, anger, upset, quite a few emotions rising there. Now, that could have taken me down a path of maybe looking at, am I not good enough? Am I, a lot of
mm,
emotions. But immediately I stopped myself and went, okay, Maureen, let's think this through.
mm,
What you're doing, actually, if this person is not ready, then she's not the right person to be doing anything with. Then if she's not connecting with, if you're talking and she's not really taking it further, then maybe it's not the right person or not the right time. So
mm.
focus on where you're going, do what you're doing, and at the right time she might come, but again, it might not even be the right time for you. So just keep going where you're going. And that helped me a
Mm,
lot. And that is what managing emotion is. And that's basically what emotional intelligence is. Because if I did not process that quickly, it could have led
mm,
to rumination, more emotions. Because you see, when we have emotions, or rather, when we have thoughts, they create emotions. And these emotions is what enables us to take a particular action. And if this is repeated continuously, it would
mm.
then lead to a behavior pattern or a deep emotion where I could then probably go into, I'm not good enough, this is not
Yeah.
what I should be doing, nobody wants to connect with me, or it could just be
Yeah.
something else. So that is emotional intelligence.
And it's interesting, and I'm just going to morin you for a bit because I can. Um, the trigger there was your expectation. You expected consciously or subconsciously that she would collaborate with you based on what
Absolutely.
you had talked about or based on what you had expected within yourself, that maybe she wasn't even on that same level with you. So I think the one thing that I have learned in all my dealings with emotional intelligence is expectations. There's
Yeah.
just something about that finding the balance of what you expect of others. We only have control over what we can expect from ourselves. Even sometimes that is not even within our limits because life happens. But let's talk about expectations. Let's explore that, the impact that that has on us and our emotional intelligence.
That's really good, actually, because it went to influence, there's always an expectation.
Mm,
When, to be able to influence people, even expectation for ourselves as well,
mm,
and that's why sometimes people feel that they can't. You hear people saying, I can't, and that is an
mm,
expectation. The expectation that you can't would then lead to you not being able to. So expectations is so important for ourselves, but also when dealing with people. And it's so important to manage your expectations, because you're absolutely right. With the conversation I'd had with this lady, there was an expectation that we're going to do something together. But when I then realized that she had posted, she was doing something with somebody else, it then made me feel, oh, what's going on here? So, and that was an expectation which I was able to manage quite quickly, because at the end of the day, yes, people can say things, but it's, and you would have an expectation, but you need to be very careful that what because what they say might not be what they mean, in essence. So
And it
you've
might
got
not
to
be
be
what you
careful.
hear.
And spot on, and it might not be what you hear, because whatever they say is landing on your brain, or what you say is landing on their brain, and so it's different brains, so it will have different
Mm,
interpretations a lot of times. And that's why also, even in leadership, especially when I'm working with leaders, one of the key things I always get them to do is, when you say something to someone, make sure that the person repeats what you said, to ensure that they've actually said what you actually meant. So, and
mm,
this is how to do work with expectations, so that you're kind of on the same page, but also realizing that even if you are on the same page, people can go off and do something else. So it's you
mm,
being able to process that. And you rightly said that the only person you can control is yourself. You can't control
mm,
anybody else. Even as a leader, you can't control somebody else. You can't motivate somebody else. What you can do is create an environment that motivates them, or create an environment that influences them to do what are wanting them to do, or what you are agreeing that they would do. So influence is being able to, one, understand the people, or the person you're working with. And I'm going to kind of keep this external for now, but everything I'm
mm.
saying apply to yourself as well. So when I say understand people, it also means understand yourself,
Understand yourself.
understand your
Mm,
emotions, excuse me, understand your thoughts, understand how you're feeling, so that when people when you're interacting with people, you're interacting with them based on remembering the fact that they're a human being as well, that might be experiencing their own feelings, their own emotions, experiencing life. So it's almost like giving them it's empathy. What we're talking about here is
mm.
not empathy, which is part of emotional intelligence, so that you're looking at things from other people's perspective as well. And there's something I call by living in the gap. So you have an idea, they have one, but there's a middle place, and that is where expectation lies, so that things could go either way. And it's having that gap to understand that, in anything you're doing, what you want to do is to understand the person. Listening is so powerful in working with people or influencing. Listen to what they say, what matters to the person, what matters to them, and then speaking to them or interacting with them based on what matters to them, because what matters to them is connected to their emotional brain. So if you can get into that emotional brain by relating to them based on what matters to them, then you're able to influence that way. And it's a better way of working with people than manipulation.
Very true. I found this as well. Even when we go in as consultants to work in large organizations and doing sort of organizational development work with them, you find that when there are glitches in management styles or within a team, communication is always a key thing. And sometimes it can come down to that simple thing of miscommunication. What I said as a manager and what my expectation is to my staff, and what they hear or interpret from what I've said and what they do, sometimes there's a bit of a conflict there. And it's purely solved by just having those leaders understand how to communicate with their teams. Because sometimes when there's a lack of emotional intelligence, you communicate how you want to communicate without considering who you're communicating with. So you often find perception, what you said versus how it's perceived, because you can say the same thing, but the tone you use in saying it can change the meaning. What you say in an email can be different to when you say it face to face. So there's a lot there around leadership, around communication, around emotional intelligence that is really part of what we do in OD. And I think I'm excited about this topic because it applies to you, to us all, to us as individuals, as leaders, as an organization, whether you're a business owner, whether you're employed, whether you're an employer. You know, I think this is a topic that needs to be paid attention to when it comes to expectations, even in relationships, in marriages. You know, what do you expect? And I think that brings me to this question, Maureen. In say, for instance, in a relationship, how far can we go with having expectations on our partners or placing expectations on our children, and what impact does that have?
Yeah, how far can you go? You can, as human beings, you can go as far as you want to go. But it still comes back to that whole concept of, because every relationship is different, everyone is different, we're all individual beings. So the key thing is to um, kind of understand who you're living with, understand who
Hmm.
the person is. And it still comes back to the communication thing. And one of the key things that I find so useful, because when I'm working with clients, when I'm working with anyone, I always start off by doing the brain mapping diagnostic. And I find it so powerful in the sense that people are wired so differently. And this is where, as a couple, even as your children, you've got to understand who they are. How are they wired? And when I say wired, it's mainly because different parts of our brain have receptors in them. And when we activate these receptors, it creates a behavior pattern. So, for example, the frontal part of the brain, you have more receptors for dopamine. So when this is activated, you find that this kind of person is very creative. They like, they come up with ideas constantly, and they like change. Now, if you are in a relationship with someone who has probably wired the back part of their brain, the estrogen area, where they don't like change, they like stability. So with someone like this, when interacting with them, for example, you might be thinking about change of some sort, which could be in a relationship, which could even be with children, maybe changing their schools, or it could be anything. Now, if it's someone that is wired that bad place, when it comes to change, they will freak out. They don't like it. And you probably, as a leader, come across this kind of people constantly at work. That when it comes to change, there are people who will resist it so much. And because they've wired that part of their brain so much, when it comes to something like change, the brain will start talking, telling them every reason why you shouldn't do it. It could even be a
Hmm.
couple who are talking about maybe change, a new business, that is change, or a new project, that is change. One person might be the dopamine driven one that constantly loves the change and loves new ideas and
Hmm.
is visionary, while the other one is very risk averse, not wanting
Hmm.
to take the risk. So it's being able to understand them, understand each other. And this is where the managing the expectation comes. So if it's the one with the dopamine driven one that is driving the change, then you've got to really explain to your partner or colleagues or staff why this change would benefit them first.
Hmm.
Because if it doesn't resonate with them, then their brain will resist it so fiercely. So it's really being able to bring it back to how would it matter to them. And that is when you're then able to have the conversation. And you could even do questioning is so good. Why where we are now, what we're doing, what is it working? Do you feel it's working for you? No. So what do you think we should do? And it gets them to really think and process. And we know the saying, especially with change, that if you keep repeating the same thing over and over, you'll get
Hmm.
the same result. So it's using things like this to talk to them about the benefits of the change by even using questions, and then gradually you'll be able to get them get them to see things, and that's
Hmm.
influence. So I hope that
Yeah.
is a good example. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll add to that. When looking to influence emotional intelligence, especially with communication, like you said, it's important to think about who you are going to communicate with. For instance, in business, if you're preparing a presentation, if it's someone who is very numbers driven, you would start maybe your first or second slide with the numbers. If you're doing a presentation to people who are more people driven, they want to know what the impact is on the people. So think about who it is you're communicating with. Who is in the room? Who is it that you want to influence? And what, like Maureen said, what's in it for them? We're back to that with him again. What's in it for them? Start with that. Because if you're able to make your request in such a way that it benefits the person that you're speaking to, you've gained them already. They're already interested in what you're saying and they're happy to meet you halfway or, all the way. So I've found that when we are within organizations, maybe consulting or whatever, it's a case of paying attention. We just sitting there and just listen and observe, because simply by, like Maureen said, listening, you would be able to gain where people are at. You'll be able to understand how people like to receive communication. So you then deliver to them on their level. So it's important to pay attention. If you want to influence with emotional intelligence, we are saying it's important to be able to listen and not just present how you want it, but present how they want it. It's very important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It cannot be about you, because you are
Mm,
dealing with someone. It really has to be the other person. If not, it's almost like you're speaking English and they're hearing it in Spanish. It will be
mm,
completely different. And you're absolutely right. One of the key things, Shelley, and I get so passionate about this, is even things like excuse me, negotiating a pay rise,
mm,
or a salary increase. This comes in so handy, and I use this with clients in particular. When you want to get for parents, I did this recently. Who are you speaking to? Who is the CEO? Who is
mm,
the manager? Who can influence that pay rise? Who are they? What matters to them? So that when you're
mm,
going to ask for that pay rise, you're speaking to their brain, you're speaking to what
mm,
matters to them, or you're presenting them with information that really matters. For example, like you use the example of someone that is numbers driven. With someone like that, you're going to them with numbers, things that you've done over the years, the amount you've brought into the organization, the impact that you've had, what you've done, and what you will still do, and how, maybe the number, if it's somebody that, if it's a manager that is more task driven, then you're speaking to him about the tasks that you've done, things that you've done in the
mm,
past year or so, and the impact that it has had, and what you're still going to do, maybe a new project or an idea that would actually help. That is where you're getting them. And it's so powerful because what you're doing is speaking to their brain. And that's a powerful influence. And you're able to use that to be persuasive to in every area, in relationships, in negotiations, in anything you want to do. It's just being able to understand people. So it takes it away from you. Somebody then said to me once, so then that it means I don't matter, so if it's not about me, and I'm
mm,
going, but you're negotiating constantly with children. When a child wants something, you're giving them, want an apple, but no, most times they don't want an apple, but maybe they want sweets or something, and they've had so many of those sweets, and you're telling them, okay, see, I'll give you the sweet, but first have this apple. That's what you're doing. It's similar
mm,
process of negotiating, so with them, or trying to influence them to see things, and you probably explain to them why the benefit of having the apple, which you should do. A lot of times we don't, and that is why they would keep refusing the apple. But when you tell them the benefits of that apple, then they'll see how it's good for them, and you might even use different things that they like to explain why it will be beneficial to them. So this is where it becomes important, that it's not that you're giving up yourself, but what you want. In fact, you're actually helping yourself, because you're thinking first and foremost what you want, What do you want to get out of that conversation? What is it you want to get out? So it really comes down to you first. And then, okay, to get what I want, I need to understand this person. And
Spot
that's
on.
emotional intelligence. So
Yeah,
I want something to get what I want. I need to now consider the person that I'm speaking to and then
spot
have the
on.
conversation. So it becomes a win-win.
What am I willing to give for what I want? That's something I always say all the time. What am I willing to give? How much do you want it? And it's just like trade, isn't it? When you go to the shops to buy something, you see that,
Bottom.
let's
Yeah.
use apples again, the bag of apples. Is it worth your money? Is it what they're charging?
Mm,
If it is, you'll exchange your money for it. So what are you willing to give for what you want? It's the same thing across. That is using emotional intelligence. Essentially, you're thinking about what you want. I want 6 apples. Is it worth £6 or is it worth 50p? You decide. And then when you then go to that trade, you then determine if that's what you're going to exchange for it. And I use a typical example, Maureen, with us communicating with us on WhatsApp. I like typing, I like texting. You like calling. So I will text you. Possibly she will not even respond to what I text. It's
I
possible.
think it's a
Yes, sometimes she might
generational thing.
not. She would not respond. I can send good morning, no response. I can send a question, no response. But if I know that I want her attention and I need it urgently, I will ring her. And because
Yeah.
she knows that I don't like ringing, I like texting. If I ring, she knows this is of high importance. She will take the call no matter what's going on because she knows Blessing is going out of her way to call me. That means it's of high. She needs my attention. This is not just she has something to say. The same way, Maureen doesn't like
Yeah.
texting. She
It's
calls
true.
me, and well, I'll answer if I can answer. She doesn't even get offended anymore. But if she sends me a text, I know it's of high importance to her because she goes out of her way to do it because she wants to get my attention. So that's a very simple example of using emotional
Yeah.
intelligence. So
That's a good
pay
one,
attention.
actually.
Pay attention. Who is the person you want to communicate with? What is it you want to get out of them? What is it that you want? What is win-win? We have to shift from this place of me, 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 it's all about me, to this place of us. I
Yeah.
win, you win.
Yeah.
And I think that's what influence with emotional
Yeah.
intelligence brings to the
Yeah.
table.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. It's definitely a win-win with the emotional change. And that's what persuasion is really all about. It's a
Hmm.
win-win. And the great and because what we've been talking about really is that influencing with emotional intelligence. And looking at it from the other perspective, which we touched on briefly, is the is when it gets very emotional sometimes
Hmm.
with situations. It's how to manage that as well, because somebody might say something to you that really upsets you, and the question then is, what do you do? A lot of times we want to go quickly and do something, kind of react to that situation. Emotional intelligence is actually being able to stop. And I call it put a brake
Hmm.
on the brain. It's being able to push on the
Hmm.
brake. And then, because once you do that, you see, because that initial response is a very subconscious one. So kind of putting the brakes on allows your conscious brain, which is your thinking brain, to come to step in, and then you're able to think and process it. But a lot of times we react from the subconscious and then regret later. So,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
even stay in the subconscious where somebody has done something, maybe a manager or a leader or a partner or spouse does something, and it maybe keeps repeating the thing, and then you're in that constant loop
Hmm.
of emotion, and then that's also a huge problem. So it's being
Yeah.
able to remember as well that you can't change the person, but the person you can change is you. And how do you do that? By managing your own emotions, managing your own actions, so that and the truth is that once you do that, most times the other person kind of responds to your change, and that's so
Hmm.
important.
Yeah, and there's something my dad used to tell me years back. He said, whenever you're triggered, he said, use your tongue to count your teeth.
Yeah, yeah, that's
And
actually
if
a proverb, isn't it? Yeah,
yes, so that's how
yeah,
I apply my breaks. Once I know I'm triggered, I just start with my tongue. By the time you're done counting, whether it's 55 or however many teeth you have, you've probably forgotten whatever it is that triggered you, and you've been able to calm down. So instead of reacting, you have the time to say, actually, I'm going to leave this for a minute and I'll come back to it. I'll sleep on it. I will let it slide, or I'll just chill and I would respond later when I'm more articulate and I'm more in control of what is going on upstairs. So bear in mind, there's no rush in reacting required. If you want to influence emotional intelligence, you don't have to have the last word. I think that's key to say. So figure out how best to apply your breaks. Have a break in place, because it's not when you require the break that you then start looking for the break. You have to have the break in place. When you're
you find
driving,
it.
you want to make sure your brake is working before you go. So you don't start
Yeah.
by heading off and then hoping that the brakes work. No, apply your brakes way before you start the journey. So part of the whole narrative here is, what are your brakes? What brakes would you put in place? So
Mm,
let us know in the comments what your brakes look like and how do you apply your brakes when you're triggered. Like I just said, mine is just like my dad said to me, is use your tongue to count your teeth. That literally distracts me from whatever is going on. How do you apply your breaks, and what are your breaks like? Tell us in the comments what yours are like. Maureen, how do you apply your breaks?
yeah, it depends on what the situation is. For me, sometimes I just stop and just go and read something or take a walk or dance. Dancing is a big one for me, especially when I'm stressed. It's stressful or in a stressful situation. I just start dancing. I remember there was a time I was managing a team of over 50 people directly, and it was really a very stressful time. We're going through a huge change, and every time I come into the office dancing, my staff will go, Maureen, what's the problem? What's wrong? Because they know that there was something. That something was, because I literally will come in and just start giving, and then no music, just like you did the other day, blessing. And they would say to me, okay, Maureen, okay, sit down. In fact, one of them used to say, sit down, sit down, sit down. Okay, tell us what do you want? How can we help? What's the problem? And so dancing is a big one for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So just to reiterate what we've been talking about, if you want to influence with emotional intelligence, it's important to pay attention when it comes to communication to who you are communicating with. Communicate in the way that what you're saying would land the way you are saying it.
Yeah.
Don't communicate the way you want to be communicated with, but the way they want to be communicated with, because then that's when you get the best response out of them. Consider win-win. What's in it for them? So you already know what's in it for you and what it is you're after. What are you willing to give for what you want? Think about that
Mm,
when you are requesting or negotiating in the act of persuasion. It's important to bear in mind that it should be a win-win situation. That way, it's people are warmer to whatever it is that you're requesting. So let's move on from that. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. Otherwise, Maureen, let's look at emotional intelligence in the business space. I mean, I travel a lot and I meet a lot of people, and I know sometimes I could be somewhere and I send you a message saying, oh, the lack of emotional intelligence stinks, because it's something that you can see from far away. How is the
mhm.
best, let's say we've equipped our listeners and the emotional intelligence. How do you deal with people who do not have or do not show their emotional intelligence?
Who don't have or who don't show. I don't think it's a case of not showing. I think it's more a case of not having.
Okay,
So,
okay,
I think it's more a case of not having. So how do you deal with people who are not emotionally intelligent, basically?
okay. Yes,
Uh,
yes.
it's like I said, you've got to, you can't, you can't, don't have any control over people. So you have responsibility for yourself. So, and I think the key is really to understand the person, so you can study the person, understand how they operate, what upsets them, how they respond, and make sure you don't take it personally. I think that's the key. Don't
Mm,
take what they do personally, because if you do, it becomes your problem. So
mm,
they are who they are. They're doing what they're doing for whatever reason. You tend to also have, especially when I do the brain mapping diagnostic that I use, you tend to have people that are wired in this left part of the brain. We call it the testosterone in the prison brain mapping diagnostic. And it's people who, especially the focusing, people who are so task oriented and don't care about other people. You tend to have quite a few leaders that can be like that. So they've risen because they've pushed their way through. It's all about them. It's all status driven. If you're working for someone like that, it can be quite challenging. So it's just really looking at the person and see, this is the way they are. They're doing what they want. I need to protect myself. So maybe they come with all sorts of demands. Instead of getting myself upset, I'll have a conversation with them and get them to
mhm,
probably explain, show them what I'm working on, and ask them, which one do you want me to prioritize for now that I'll give back to you? So really break it down, so that, because a lot of times, especially when people are wired in that dopamine and the testosterone, they tend not to really think about the nitty gritty of things. It's all about the doing and getting the results sometimes. So it's actually breaking it down for them so that they can see, the realistic situation. And that, you asking them the question, will make them think as well. And
mm,
sometimes they won't. But what you can do is, just, I would say, take control. It's like really managing upwards sometimes with someone like that.
mm,
So in essence, you're managing upwards by, putting everything down to little bits, breaking into little chunks and dealing with them that way. But don't take it personally. That is so important, because if you do, it will become very draining. And what I
mm,
find a lot of times is people become so overwhelmed by it because they have expectations of how that person should be dealing with them or interacting with them. And when that person doesn't meet the expectations, it then gets them so emotional. Manage those
mm.
expectations, because you have expectations, but they are doing what they want. So you've got to manage those expectations and so to protect yourself emotionally as well. Um, so I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it does. How do we manage expectations, ours and others, if that's applicable?
By I think it depends on the situation, obviously, but with everything, it's really looking, just remembering. I think it's just reminding yourself that, one, I don't have control over this person. This person
Mm,
has their own wiring. The way they behave, the way they've been wired over time, that's their own brain. I don't have any control over that. So I'm going to deal with things based on how, what I receive from them. So for example, if I'm going to a negotiation with them or interaction with them, I'm listening very attentively to what they say, because you can pick out a lot
mm,
from what people say, basically from what's in their brain. But so that comes out.
mm,
And I ask them questions, because a lot comes out from questions, because a lot of times people will answer from their subconscious, so it tells you a lot about them. Then I will use that to kind of manage the expectations that I have of them. And as think, because literally, I think you put this post up on social media a few weeks ago, that when people tell you who they are, show you who they are, believe them. So it's really
mm,
using, that principle to deal with people. So this is the, from the questions I've asked, from my interaction with this person, from how they speak, from what they do, I'm paying close attention, and that's my expectations. I'll use that to form the
Mm.
expectations I have, so that when things get, they do something, yes, it might disappoint me, but not for too long. If you see what I mean, it will be a
Mm.
case of, so this is the way the person's. I had someone reach out to me a few weeks ago about someone she was working with that did something that really hurt her or disappointed her, and it was really it was very emotional for her and stopping her from actually taking decisions. So what we
Mm.
had to do was, it was this same principle of now stepping back. High expectations, and all she kept saying is, I expected, I expected, I expected.
Mm.
When you hear yourself saying, they should have, they should have, you should have done this, or they should know, or those are expectations. That's when you stop yourself. Stop the shoulds, stop
Mm.
the expecting, and just,
Mm.
people are people. People really are people. So you've got to rein it in and deal with people based on what you see. And someone might be so good now and change tomorrow. That's human nature. It is what it is. So and that's part of the managing the expectations. So you don't put a whole lot of hope into someone, because they can be, human beings can do things that are not expected.
Very true. Very true. And it's this thing called positive projection, where we project ourselves or our expectations onto people without them telling us that that's who they are or that's what they are
Exactly.
offering. We project it because that's what we want, and it's possible
Exactly.
for us to see a frog and call that frog a prince because we want that frog to be a prince. So we keep kissing that frog and kissing that frog and like, become a prince, become a prince. And no prince ain't becoming, and then we're disappointed. But when you scale it back, the frog was always a frog. You're the one who projected princehood on the poor frog. And if you had just seen the frog as a frog, the frog could have just done whatever frogs do and be the best frog in the
True.
pond. But because we project our own expectations onto people, it hampers relationships.
Yeah.
It leads to disappointment. It's just damning for everyone involved. So it's important to manage expectations, especially our own. I suppose only ours. We've only got control over ours. And you
Mm-hmm.
find in relationships as well, be it parents, child, spouses, whatever, work relationships, leaders and the staff, if expectations are placed, it creates such a burden,
Yeah.
because then that person that you've placed expectation on, if they're not emotionally intelligent enough to understand that it's not their problem but yours, they carry that weight and they're living outside of themselves to be who you want them to be, to achieve what you want them to achieve. So it's just a waste of time for them. And you who is placing the expectation on them, you never get the satisfaction either because it's not your life. So I think
Mm.
from every aspect of it, we would strongly recommend expectations must be managed.
Yeah.
Check yourself, be aware of what expectations you're placing on your spouse, on your friends, on your children, on your parents, on your staff, on your leaders. Manage your expectations.
Mm.
Manage. If we all manage our expectations, I think it will make things a little bit better.
Yeah. For everyone. For
Hmm.
everyone. So true.
Hmm.
So true. And I love the fact we didn't we maybe in another session we'll talk about children, the expectations
Hmm.
we place on children, because that's a huge
Hmm.
one. Because a lot of times the adults that you're finding today, I always tell leaders, the adults that you're managing in the workplace, what you're managing are the brains of when they were children. So it's how they're wired from childhood. They grow with that and come into the workplace, and then you're dealing with it, or they are
Hmm.
dealing with themselves as well. So I think that's one that we really need to look at. And the other thing is, in terms of managing it, a lot of times what you do is, because you're expecting something, you become so blinded to everything else,
Everything
and
else.
then you start seeing having that expectation in everyone and everything. And that's why
Mm,
it's so important to just stop and think about what your what your thoughts are relating to your
mm,
interaction with people. And just
mm,
pay attention to people. I think that's the key. Learn who people are. Take time to understand
mm,
people. Who are the people you're working with? A lot of managers, a lot of leaders in every sphere don't take time to understand the people that they're working or interacting with. It's all about what they
mm.
want. So take time to
Yeah.
understand the people, because when you do, that actually is the first key to managing expectations, because you know what this person is or capable of, and then you can actually help them grow if they need to grow into something, but
Mm,
that has to be mutual, a mutual agreement
mm,
that, okay, maybe this is where you want to go, let's work together. But just placing it on them, I expected you to do this, or I expect you, and sometimes it comes to what we call mind reading. A lot of times people expect other people to understand what is in their own mind. So my expectations is you should do this. How is the person supposed to know that that's what you want? They're not. We're not mind readers. So
no.
yeah, and that's all part of the managing expectations. Just remember that you're not a mind reader, and other people are
Mm.
not mind readers
Yeah,
as
they.
well. So,
Yeah. So we'll round up by saying, when you're setting your goals or your tasks, remember that you're setting them for yourself, not for
yes.
the other person. So let your expectations be managed, even the ones you're placing on yourself, because you only have, I don't even want, you only have influence, first of all, on yourself. And then if you can manage your emotional intelligence and use it effectively, you might be able to influence others. So bear that in mind when you are setting your tasks. I always say to my children, you can't attract for somebody else. So don't expect that mommy or daddy or your siblings would magically do what it is that you want them to do. You work it out for yourself. But if you want someone else to be involved, what are you willing to give for what you want? So we're back to this same thing again. And if we can apply that in everything we do in life, it will make for a more enjoyable experience, wouldn't you say, Maureen?
Yeah, and I think yes, I agree. Because I think the aspect of what you're willing to give, sometimes people look at it as giving too much. Usually people that are wired in that estrogen become so
Mm,
worried about giving of themselves, because that is how they've wired themselves over time to be givers anyway. So almost becomes a trap. And this is why you need to at least, and that's what emotional intelligence is all about. It's really understanding
mm,
yourself and knowing how to manage yourself. And I like what you said, it's really you first. And that's so key,
mm,
because you've got to understand yourself first, understand how you're wired. If you've become that people pleaser that is just giving, 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 then yes,
mm,
you need to rein that down, because that's not helpful for you. But when interacting with people, it's really understanding yourself and then understanding the person, or the
mm,
people as well, so that you can then have that influence, which is a more positive way of getting that win-win from
mm,
from
mm,
people. So that's really key. I just wanted to add that, because sometimes, a lot of times, we're speaking to the ones that are just give me, give me, give. It's all about me. But there's
mm,
also the other ones who are just givers anyway. So they keep giving while the other ones keep taking. And this is where that balance becomes important. But you've
mm,
got to understand who you are, so that you can actually make that adjustment. The other thing I wanted to add finally is, when we're talking of goals, especially when we're talking about how we set goals and all that, when it comes to organizational or team goals, shared goals are so important. This is where you come together as a team to talk about the goals that you're setting for a period of time or for the year or for whatever. It's so important to really come together, and you have to start from individual goals first. What are people's individual goals?
Mm,
The mistake a lot of leaders make is that they go into goal setting and it's just organizational goals. If you do that, a lot of times people will flow with you, but the goals are so disconnected from their own. It does not align with their own goals. And when that happens along the way, you find that people are not involved, or they're not, you don't have their buy-in, and you start struggling. Yeah, they're not doing what they're meant to do. They're not, and then performance management comes in and all that. It's really from that initial stage. You've got to get into, if people have to set their goals and let it and show how it aligns with the organizational or team goals first and foremost. Involve people, not just, they're not machines, they're human beings.
mm.
And if you don't connect to that emotional brain of each of them, you would lose them along the way.
Very true. Very true. Very true. Well, thanks, Maureen, for this lovely time we've spent, and thanks everyone for joining in. That's all we've got time for on this session. We are really grateful that you do take the time to watch or listen to us, and we will be back again soon with another session. But until then, thank you. See you soon.
Thank you.